Maybe in the last minute of your life, you want to be something more than a goddamn savage!
Annunziare mendatio. Ego sum homo indomitus.
Fearless rash, insanity. He watches the game fantasy. Radio one, forbidden sight. He searches under of the shadows and
You like this? Oh, you like being food for the immortal?
What is happening, my savage friends? You are listening to the voice of. It is Friday night, 26th of May, 2041 p.m. It is time to fuck that band. We here at the Savage Show welcome you, arms wide open. What is going on, each and every one of you? I appreciate you, whether you are joining us live or watching us on the repeat. Welcome in. I would like to invite you to lift high whatever it is you are imbibing and join us in the Savage Salute. Here's to us. What is like us? Not a goddamn thing. Tastes like unwavering perseverance. I'd like to remind you here on the Savage Show that you are listening to a broadcast that will contain strong language, sensitive subject matter, images, content, all intended for a mature 18 years or older audience. Viewer discretion is advised. This broadcast contains copywritten content, however, under the Fair Use Act, Section 504C2, Title 17 of the United States Code. This content is presented for the purposes of education and entertainment through the use of parody, satire, critique, analysis, and/or social commentary by means of subjective opinion. Which means you have been forewarned. Put your kiddies to bed. Lock up your wives, lock up your daughters. It's time for the men to speak. What is going on, everybody? It has been a wild and wacky week, as it is wont to be. One of those things about walking your walk, not bending your back, being upright, doing what you're supposed to do, whether people are looking or not. That is your responsibility as an incarnate spirit here on earth. And you'd be surprised how hard that is to do sometimes. Many men acquiesce and lay down and surrender and die. You and I would not be one of those, no. Having stared death straight in the face, locked eyes, maybe blew a cute little kiss, and quite literally said, "Not today, Satan." We got a good show for you tonight. It's been the past 3 weeks in a row. How about that? I've actually made a commitment and stuck to it, and it's actually garnered some attention. Now, recently I did sort of reassess the type of presence I would like to have out there in the ethers, and being kind of coy and trying to do it through the back door and trying to impress people who are sideways, sort of peripherally, tangentially curious about some of the stuff that I wish to talk about and trying to do it in a safe and PC way. Not that a savage immortal is either safe or PC, but just trying to do it in a way that's not just head on and direct. Is not the surest, quickest path towards success. No, it's better just to hang your balls out and say, there they are. I'm mighty proud of them. They are freshly washed. I do not care to shave them, but you are welcome to inspect them. Study them closely. You may work. One of your future colleagues may be of my seed. It's interesting. So late last year, and I would say towards the fall, winter of last year, I seriously was not interested in anything. And I was seriously contemplating just fucking going back home. Um, it's interesting, they talk about the rate of people who unalive themselves, and we have to use code terms for this, but it's a big S word, uh, especially amongst males, amongst men, in the Western world, are extremely high, uh, because support systems aren't like they were. You quite literally have to accept the fact that you're out there on your own. And you used to read like cute little stories in school about I was raised and now I'm striking out on the world to seek my fortune. Uh, and it sounds kind of funny, kind of kooky, but geez, those little nursery rhymes sometimes have a lot of truth to them, and a lot of them are brutal. They're about like babies falling out of fucking trees and like cracking their head open, and there's always demons like trying to hunt you, and if you're not the good kid, we're gonna feed you to you know some sort of like anti-Christmas demon. Uh and there's that thing about trying to scare your kids straight and all that. Now I don't know. A certain amount of healthy fear and respect is necessary if you're to be a authoritative figure in your child's life, but that is not to say that you need to run a house of terror. They just need to know that um, the first authority that they're going to encounter is their parents, and that their parents generally want what's best for them, unless they're insane psychopaths. Then it's the community's duty to come together and take a village. The village takes you. But essentially to say that there's no soft path in life. All things that are easy in life are not worth having. And all things that are a struggle are truly savored. They say it's that sweet taste of victory. Because you know why? Victory tastes sweet because up until then, you're just constantly eating shit. Constantly. Everybody's there for the after party. Everybody wants to pat you on the back and say, hey, I had my eye on you the whole time. I knew you were going to make it to the big show one day. We actually kind of were in the process of pulling out a chair when we saw that you were just about to cross that finish line. We were tempted to kind of like help you out for a second here or there, but we saw you down there. We knew you had it. So hey, welcome to the tent. Welcome to the after party. Somebody get this guy a blowjob. Get this guy a beer. All right, sit down. Let's have a talk. And rightfully so. I mean, there is some truth in flattery and imitation. You can truly admire somebody and perhaps become a Pepsi to his Coke. But is that truly a victory? The originators. And that's why self-created men, sure, they'll bitch a little bit during the process of the toil, but sweet success, people who can actually remember and resonate with being hungry and being disbelieved and doubted. Find ways to stay humble, even from the mountaintop. Yeah. Joining us, we have Ms. Janet from another planet saying scary. I would say savage, not necessarily scary. Fear is a state of mind. One that in some instances can be instructive and life-saving, but it's not necessarily a way to conquer your immediate stratosphere. But no, we just like to sort of warm up, kind of get the juices flowing, kind of say hi to the chat, welcome people in. Want to remind you to like, share, subscribe, share this thing out. Make sure that you're thumbs upping the video. We want to make sure that the algorithm catches all this, and you know, these cute little shows before everything just blows up and truly gets savage. I always wonder what planet Janet comes from, and it's like planet damn it Janet. Is it something like that? But yeah, these are all people from the various spheres and tangents that I occupy out there. I'm an occasional guest person on several streams. The one that I know Janet from, the one that I would like to invite you guys out to, is on Tuesday nights. That would be United Resistance on the Supreme Heretics channel, where we're basically just pointing out the sideshow. You know, most people, I think, are fairly certain that there's something kooky up with the way that the news sort of, you know, throws everything on the grand stage for a little song and dance, and they say the buzzwords and they drop the names and they talk about the products, and then you don't really learn anything. It's like edutainment. Well, on United Resistance, we not only tell you the story that they're trying to distract you from, we call out the players, and it's sometimes it's not nice. But you know what? They don't have your best interests at heart. The carbon they want to reduce is you. Yeah. So yeah, I'm an occasional guest star. I do have a unique perspective, a savage one, if you will. Um, just a humble crystal skull, kind of spewing the knowledge that I have trapped in me. Uh, and it's one of those things, you know, I have made myself relatable for the purposes of feeding and clothing myself, but I still have all this stuff rattling around in my head, and I still do detect patterns in life, and some of these things are going to be extremely relevant. So, without further ado, let's kind of rip into this. The main thought for tonight is the idea of cymatics. Now, what is cymatics? Well, the best way to start is at the beginning. Most religious or sacred texts start at the beginning, and they express this idea of nothingness, of chaos, of the void, of the time before time, when there was literally nothing, nothingness. I am that I am. It's not just something cute Popeye said. It's that true thought that there is literally no way to conceive of anything else unless there is relativity. And how do you invoke relativity? How do you create relativity? Well, if you go back to the good old Bible, the first thing in Genesis says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He said, let there be light. Now, that's so fucking basic that a lot of people skip over what that means. And it took a couple thousand years before anybody thought to sort of like tack on something to those ideas. Now, I'm not a Christian, but there is something to be said with understanding sacred texts and putting the words of wisdom that thousands have looked up to, millions, dare I say billions, have revered for years and generations. And these are things that we might disagree over some of the way that these items are couched or clothed, but the very basis of the word does seem to ring true. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he said, let there be light. Now, if we go over to the book of John, and this is the New Testament, which may or may not contain plagiarisms, right? The book of John, the first verse of John, the first chapter of John says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. This thing says word 3 times. It mentions God twice, but it mentions the Word 3 times. What does that mean? God said, let there be light. He spoke light into being. What does that mean? Well, the Bible doesn't really elucidate that point too much. Most of the point of the Bible is to say, prostrate yourself before big guns upstairs. And most of the point of the New Testament is to say, or else, So in order to put some sort of like context to this, unfortunately, we're going to have to step outside of Christianity and Judaism, right? We're going to have to really ask ourselves, what was the world like when these things were written? Who wrote them? For what purpose? The first 5 books in the Bible, known as the Pentateuch or the Torah, who wrote those? Well, everybody's going to say the Hebrews. The Hebrews wrote that. But who were the Hebrews? Okay. It is a known fact that the Hebrews have been enslaved several times throughout their history. And Holocaust aside, that's modern times. We're talking about like they were enslaved by the Hittites, they were enslaved by the Babylonians, and they were enslaved by the Egyptians. Now, servitude, forced, it's not even indentured servants. It's not even like you'll get your freedom back if you weed the garden for 20 years. It's like, no, I'm going to say jump. You're going to say how high. I'm going to say kill yourself, and you're going to say, how would you like me to do that? I'm going to say your daughter's fair to look upon, and you're going to hand her to me. That is slavery. That is slavery. And that is partially what was endured in Egypt. But also what ends up happening is that you are exposed to your captor's ideas. Okay, now, love the Hebrews or hate them, there are elements of the faiths of each of those people that they experienced bondage under that survived into their faith. So we were talking about the pyramids of Giza last time. The pyramids of Giza will come up again in this podcast, just because they're so damn fascinating. I've spent I spent like at least an hour last week talking about the pyramids of Giza, talking about how they were actually, in fact, power plants transmitting energy wirelessly. It's a common misconception that the Hebrews were enslaved and forced to build the pyramids. That is not true. That has been debunked. I'm not going to go through that once again on this podcast. I'm going to say, why don't you go ahead and pull up the last episode and educate yourself a little bit more. Everything that I am going to say from this point forward is going to assume that you guys are on board with me in that respect. Okay. But whether or not you want to say that the Hebrews built the pyramids, we can agree that they were enslaved. Pharaoh figured very prominently in their Exodus, okay, and that the idea of monotheism, which was very much introduced in Egypt for that part of the world and for those major faiths that sprung from it, it originated in Egypt. And most people, as far as like a general consensus of what people understand about Egyptian mythology, I would say most people know who Osiris is, or at least they've heard the name. Most people are definitely familiar with ISIS, and not just because of Barack Obama and Osama bin Laden, but because ISIS is like one of the most universally revered goddess figures, and she goes by many, many, many names. But in Egypt, she was Isis. Most people have heard of Ra. Some people know of Ma'at. If you do, you're pretty cool. But everybody knows about Ra. And I'll tell you a secret. The very last, well, let's say it like this. The idea of monotheism was introduced in Egypt. You had, for the first time, a god named Amen-Ra, which literally meant Ra, the unseen. Now, what does that mean? Earlier in the Bible, like before we get to Egypt and before we get to Moses and all that kind of shit, they talk about how Adam had a bunch of sons and grandsons and blah, blah, blah. And all of this line basically had to deal with moving around in a world where each nation had its own national god that in many instances the elite and the priest class could approach and talk to. And then at some point, these gods left the earth, except for some reason, this one dude named Yahweh wanted to hang out in a cigar-shaped craft inside of a burning bush, which really isn't a burning bush. It's just obscured by smoke. It's multidimensional, right? And a lot of these things will take on different meanings if you just apply modern sight to these stories. But the idea of a God that you could approach and talk to. In the Bible, Moses was handed 10 commandments. The Bible will say the first set of commandments was written by God's own finger. God's own finger. That means that God took 2 stones and like chipped away, thou shalt not, and thou shalt, and thy graven images, and here you go, Moses. Now take those down to your people. And Moses is like, yep, you got it, bud. And he walks them down and he sees people like worshiping cows and like killing other people. And he's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? And he got so pissed off, he threw them on the ground and they smashed. Moses got so mad, he broke something that God wrote. Because he's like, what the fuck? I went up there to come back and tell you what he wants, and you forgot all about me, and now you're doing this. Well, let's kill all these fuckers and start all over again. Okay. Now I'm starting to get away from this, but I'll bring it back home. Amen-Ra. In Egypt, there are stories where the gods were present. You could approach Ra in a certain way. You could approach Horus in a certain way. You could approach Thoth in a certain way. But then at some point, these gods removed themselves from the earth. And I'll tell you what, they were actually told to get the fuck off of Earth. So what we have is basically a memory of that point. Remove thyself from the planet. Get the fuck off my world. Okay. But who was Ra's boss? Right? People know about the Egyptian gods, but they don't realize that those gods had a boss. There was somebody that they answered to. Right? Egypt was actually handed to these gods. Well, where the fuck did it come from? If you look at what the Egyptians say, there was a god in the beginning named Ptah. In English, it's rendered Ptah, Ptah. Ptah is known as the developer, which is interesting because if you look at the caricatures or the representations of the gods, you will see that with like maybe only 2 exceptions, every other one of the Egyptian gods were rendered with a human body, perhaps wings, but with the face of a type of animal native to Africa. Except for two. One of them was Ma'at, and the other was Ptah. And I think Ptah is interesting because he is depicted very simply. Like he is literally just a dude. He looks like just a dude. He has a staff, he has an ankh, and he has like one of those fake little beards, like you see on like the King Tut thing. He had one of those on his chin. But what was he responsible for? Everything. If you go to Wikipedia, and I'm not really recommending you do that too much, it'll say that Ptah spoke the world into being. And once again, we have the word, the power of the word. Remember in John, it said, in the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. With Ptah, we have him speaking and issuing forth, manifesting through sound, physicality. Now, it's interesting. Most people, especially in this vein, like if you're into freaky topics and you're into mytho-historical kind of shit, you have heard of the Egyptian god Thoth. Some people will say Thoth. It's Thoth. They know him as the ibis-headed god, and they know him as the finger of God. They know him as the scribe. They might have heard of something called like the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, where they, or a lot of New Age hippies have really ran with that idea. And I'm not calling that out. I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not calling it full of shit. There's some all right stuff in there if you want to read that and kind of like yeah, there's some okay stuff in there. But this whole reverence of Thoth, they're like, oh my God, Thoth, like he got the word and he wrote it down. But Ptah issued the word. The word came out of his mouth, if you want to imagine it that way. And Thoth heard the word and he wrote it down, and he wrote the book and you read it. Okay, so I'm not saying he's not a good dude, but he's basically a secretary. Thoth is Ptah's secretary, right? He had to be pretty fucking smart to listen and understand and write it down. Invented writing, invented knowledge, invented books, whatever. But he took dictation. He took dictation. Yes. Yes. So what does all that mean? That's very archetypical. That's very, it's very much a fairy tale, right? Most mythology is fairy tales, right? It's something to captivate the time, something to make you docile, something to make you strive towards something better, because you can contemplate your own suffering in relation to these grander things. Well, why am I doing this? Because we need you to work. Why am I working? Because the God set this up. Why did the God set this up? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because of this. In the beginning, there was the Word. Ptah issues the Word. The Word becomes manifest. God says, let there be light. God creates the heavens and the earth. God creates the animals. God creates man. Man is put in the garden to work. Because why? Because God said so. God gave the Word. Well, I'd like to talk about something a little bit deeper, something that is closely related to the Word, but something that not many people really reach out and think about. Okay. I would like to talk to you about a science called cymatics. Now, what is cymatics? Actually, I do have a short video I'd like to play for you guys to explain this. Cymatics, this is from a TED Talk. TED, not to be confused with Bill. Not an excellent. Check this out.
I'm a creative technologist, and the focus of my work is on public installations. And one of my driving passions is this idea of exploring nature and trying to find hidden data within nature. And it seems to me that there's this latent potential everywhere, all around us. Everything gives out some kind of data, whether it's sound or smell or vibration. And through my work, I've been trying to find ways to harness and unveil this. And so this basically led me to a subject called cymatics. Now, cymatics is the process of visualizing sound by basically vibrating a medium such as sand or water, as you can see there. So if we have a quick look at the history of cymatics, beginning with the observations of resonance by Da Vinci, Galileo, the English scientist Robert Hooke, and then Ernest Chladni. And he created an experiment using a metal plate, covering it with sand, and then bowing it to create the Chladni patterns that you see here on the right. Moving on from this, the next person to explore this field was a gentleman called Hans Jenny in the 1970s, and he actually coined the term cymatics. And then bringing us into the present day is a fellow collaborator of mine and cymatics expert, John Stuart Reid, and he's kindly recreated for us the Chladni experiment. What we can see here is a metal sheet, this time connected to a sound driver and being fed by a frequency generator. And as the frequencies increase, so do the complexities of the patterns that appear on the plate, as you can see for your own eyes. So what excites me about cymatics? Well, for me, cymatics is an almost magical tool. It's like a looking glass into a hidden world. And through the numerous ways that we can apply cymatics, we can actually start to unveil the substance of things not seen. Devices like the cymoscope that you can see here are being used to scientifically observe cymatic patterns, and the list of scientific applications is growing every day. For example, in oceanography, a lexicon of dolphin language is actually being created by basically visualizing the sonar beams that the dolphins emit, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to gain some deeper understanding of how they communicate. We can also use cymatics for healing and education. This is an installation developed with school children where their hands are tracked, and it allows them to control and position cymatic patterns and the reflections that are caused by them. We can also use cymatics as a beautiful natural art form. This image here is created from a snippet of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony playing through a cymatic device. So it kind of flips things on its head a little bit. And this is Pink Floyd's Machine playing in real time through the cymatic. We can also use cymatics as a looking glass into nature, and we can actually recreate the archetypal forms of nature. So for example, here on the left, we can see a snowflake as it would appear in nature. And then on the right, we can see a cymatically created snowflake. And here's a starfish and a cymatic starfish. And there's thousands of these. So what does this all mean? Well, there's still a lot to explore, and it's early days, and there's not many people working in this field. But consider for a moment that sound does have form, and we've seen that it can affect matter and cause form within matter. Then sort of take a leap and think about the universe forming, and think about the immense sound of the universe forming. And if we kind of ponder on that, then perhaps cymatics had an influence on the formation of the universe itself. And here's some eye candy for you from a range of DIY scientists and artists from all over the globe. And cymatics is accessible to everybody, and I want to urge everybody here to apply your passion, your knowledge, and your skills to areas like cymatics. And I think collectively we can build a global community, we can inspire each other, and we can evolve this exploration of the substance of things not seen. Thank you.
All right, that's some TED Talks talking about cymatics. Now, there's a couple of interesting points, and I'm glad that he sort of talked about these things before I got into them. So, cymatics started off as a very simple experiment. They put sand on a metal plate, and back in the olden times, they vibrated that plate with a bow, with a rosin bow. The sound that was engendered by the vibration of the plate caused the sand to displace into a visual pattern. Now, as equipment became more technologically advanced, they were able to change the pitch that was applied to the plate, and then using a measurement in hertz, they were able to get ever more intricate and, quite honestly, beautiful patterns to manifest on this plate. Now, what does that have to do with the word of God and Todd digging out the fucking Nile and, handing it off to Ra? Well, I'll tell you. But first, I'd like to ask you once again, like the fucking video, share it out, get the numbers up. This is some really intricate stuff, some very, very high IQ stuff. Not everybody's going to be able to dig this, and I'm fine with that. It's just another word from the crystal skull. Really, the heart of this is the effect that vibrating matter has on the physical universe. Okay? They say that every atom in the universe, every molecule exists in a state of specific vibration. And they talk about it on I guess the most mainstream thing that they've talked about it on is probably Star Trek. There was a episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, and this is the one where well, I'll talk about the one that Scotty guest starred in. Now, Scotty, like he's from the old fucking Enterprise, the old TV show from the 60s. Star Trek The Next Generation ran in the late 80s, early 90s. They got the actor on, James Doohan, to rehash his character and tell like a touching story. It was a pretty good send-off for Scotty, to tell you the truth. It involved a Dyson Sphere, which is its own feat of engineering. A Dyson Sphere postulates that a gigantic structure can be built around a star, and if we're to equate it to a G-type star like Sol, imagine you built a structure like a ring around the sun that extended 93 million miles, or roughly the orbit of. So it's basically an artificial structure that exists within a star's green zone and can harness all the radiant energy out to that point and make it useful. Okay. Now, in the episode, Scotty's like kind of like too old, and like his knowledge base is out of touch with the needs of the current enterprise. He's trying to help out Geordie LaForge, who you guys probably remember from reading Rainbow, and for being a slave named Kuta Kinte. Scotty gets drunk, of course. He's like, fuck this shit. Fuck the shit, laddie. If you don't need me, I'll get drunk. He drinks a bunch of green shit, which turns out to be all Dublin whiskey. And they have a problem with the Dyson Sphere, but like Geordie and Scotty end up saving the day because of some shit that Scotty had left on his old, like, fucking 90-year-old ship. And as the episode is coming to an end, Geordie and Scotty are shooting the shit, and they start talking about this like alien space baby that was born in interstellar space, thought the Enterprise was its mom, attached itself to the impulse drive, and started suckling. And it was draining the ship's power. Like the main ship's power is based on matter and antimatter. This thing was sucking out more energy than the Enterprise was able to gather, and it was on ship's batteries, and the batteries were about to die. So what do? Well, Geordie starts talking about how everything in the universe, everything in our physical universe oscillates at about 8 centimeters. That means back and forth vibration. Now, we don't necessarily conceive of that as sound, because 8 centimeters isn't something that we can readily listen to. It can be rendered listenable if we take that 8 centimeters and, say, assign it a relative note, and then broadcast that note within our auditory range, and then say, like, yeah, this is for, and this is apocryphal, but say like the 8 centimeters corresponds to middle C, except it's fucking 6 billion octaves below middle C, something like that. Now, that note is meaningless since it exists outside of our perceptual range. But if we translate it into something that we can understand, like the middle C, then suddenly we can conceive of the vibration of every molecule as the basis of reality. So when we say something like Ptah spoke and it was, or God said, let there be light, and there was, what we are talking about is the mobilization of all that is into pattern. And it's like such a miracle that we have senses that can relate to these patterns. Now, in one sense, vibration is all there is. Everything vibrates, and all of our sensory organs are arrayed to measure this vibration in differing ways. Our sense of sight takes in light and then divides vibrations from across the spectrum, and changes it into colors so that we can process it and understand things as they are. Our sense of hearing takes the vibrations, and given we're in a pressurized gas bubble, but whatever vibrations are beating on the gas or immediately surrounding us, we're able to process that into sound. And that's just humanity. Without even going off planet, we have animals like bats that use sonar at night. A bat can eat 100 pounds of mosquitoes a night. And it doesn't just like go to McDonald's and order a mosquito. It flies around, and as tiny as mosquitoes are, bats know where they are, and they fucking kill them. I love bats. So does Bruce Wayne. Dolphins, whales, cetaceans utilize sound underwater. When you go swimming with a dolphin, first of all, dolphins are horny bastards. Dolphins commit every crime without compunction. But at the same time, they're very smart, you know. A dolphin, when you swim with a dolphin, it can see through you. It can see all of the solid surfaces in your body, but our bodies are mostly water, as a matter of fact. Dolphins can see tumors. Dolphins can tell when women are pregnant. If a woman is giving birth in the vicinity of a dolphin will assist a woman giving birth. And then other dolphins will try to have sex with her. That's just how dolphins do. But it's experiencing the world through a sensory device. Now, it's interesting. We have stories like, what's his name? Daredevil, where this guy is blind, but he is able to experience the world through auditory senses. We have stories like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where the earth-bending master was a 10-year-old girl who was blind, and she was able to experience the world as a result of vibrations. As long as her feet were planted on a solid surface, she could sense everything that was attached to that surface. Even comedically, like she was talking to the Avatar about like you, and there's a colony of ants down there with like 10,000 individuals. My guards are like 500 feet away. My house is over there 20 yards in that direction. Very comedically, but it was describing such a feat. And this is just like we conceive of it as common sound, but this is like literally the mechanism through which reality is created. We talk about things like different dimensions and different densities. This is like the physical density, third density. I live on third density. My house is in third density. I go to work in third density. I walk outside and there's a third density ship flying around in third density. And then I go to third density ship, and then there's fourth density and fifth density and sixth density beings on that ship. You know, and what the fuck does that mean? That means that in each of these overtones, and if we want to liken it to that middle C note, you have octaves. You have like that middle C, you have the next C up, you have the next C up, and you have the next C up. So you can say that middle C is like third density. The next density up, that's like the fourth dimension, that's the next C up. The fifth density, that's the next C up from there. The sixth density, that's the next C up from there. Every one of those C's in and of itself is a physicality in and of itself, but because of the relative vibrations, we experience it differently. Right? Now, the savage perspective, the perspective of myself, right? I have been able to see auras since I was a teenager. And when you talk to people about like, ooh, auras and blah, 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 human beings and their spiritual energetic matrix actually go through at least 12 of those octaves. And when you're seeing auras, you're picking up pieces of that human as it expresses itself through each of those piano octaves, right? Which is why a lot of these beings in the finer densities find us very fascinating, because there is a component of ourselves that manifest across their experience. And the only way that I can think to explain it is if you're ever watching a show and then they get stuck in like the second dimension, and there's like second dimensional beings, but they only can experience us as dots or lines because that's the limit of their ability of perception. right? It's the same sort of thing. We might be like lights or whatever as it relates to their experience of us, but they have one nonetheless. And it's interesting because like 90% of the people are just doing ignorant stuff and just carrying on oblivious. It's very, 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 very interesting. Okay. So basically, we have established that in the beginning there was Word, and the Word was God. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The universe was spoken into existence. It manifests itself across different vibrational densities, thresholds, if you will, some of which incorporate our third density experience of everything, some of which create a very, very much finer density things. But what can we do with that? That's a good thing to understand, but how can we utilize that? How can we make that a practical tool? Can we make it a practical tool? Is that practical? Yes, absolutely it is. Matter of fact, evidence of that exists on Earth. You know, people tend to think of the Stone Age as this time of like ignorance. It's like people were so dumb they thought rocks were neat. Rocks are neat, but like in a different way than people tend to conceive of Stone Age people. When we think of Stone Age people, the typical image that comes to mind are things like the Flintstones and the Geico commercial caveman. So simple a caveman can do it, and just like physically cumbersome beings who could barely speak, and they were covered with hair, and they wore like animal skins and lived in dirt and lived in caves because they were just barely smart enough to be alive. You know, it's like one better than common animals, not sophisticated human beings like we are. They could never build a city. Well, I got some news for you, sunshine. Um, the very things that are mundane about the Stone Age stand alongside feats of engineering that have yet to be duplicated, even by our current state of technology. There are things like the Great Pyramids of Giza, okay? And not just the Great Pyramids of Giza. That's simply the most well-known megalithic site. You know, you have Stonehenge, which is probably a close second as far as what most people conceive of as Stone Age achievement. You got the Giza complex, you got Stonehenge, and you got 7 billion motherfuckers going, how the fuck did they do that? Because if you ask an engineer, you know, explain the Great Pyramids, I'll be like, yeah, okay, so it's mostly granite. It has a little bit of limestone. It had some gold at some point, and it's you know, so many feet high and so many feet wide at the base, and it's aligned to the cardinal points of Earth, and it's pretty fucking cool. And they'd be like, okay, could you build one? And he'd be like, nope, sure can't. Because people are still thinking in terms of, I need to get a crane. Like first I need to get like a plan together. I need to know how many blocks I'm going to use, and say for argument's sake, for shits and giggles, let's say that there's 3 million individual stone blocks that I have to cut and measure and quarry and place. I have to level out the surface. I have to place all these fucking blocks in a certain way that makes sense to support these interior chambers that I've designed for it. You know, the modern engineer doesn't know the fuck why, but you ask him to duplicate something that's already there, he could do it this way. And the best things that we have to cut granite would probably be pressurized water. Pressurized water could probably do it. I've heard people say like, well, maybe the granite was sluiced and then like recombined somehow. Well, no, we know that that's not fucking true because we found the quarry where the rocks were cut and then moved, and it's hundreds of miles away from the site of Giza. So that theory's nah. So eventually we can conceive of the fact that a plan needs to be had, which includes 3 million blocks, again for shits and giggles, has to account for the space inside, because we have all those chambers, right? We have the subterranean chamber, we have the king and queen's chamber, we have the shafts, we have the entrances, all that kind of shit. And then we know where the materials are. They're a couple 100 miles away. So let's cut them and shape them and drag them out to the surface that we leveled at the exact fucking center of landmass on Earth. Right? And you'd ask him, well, how do you do it? And he goes, it can't be done. It can't be done. Well, how was it done? I don't know. And then like, it's cute, but people want to say, oh, it was the gods. Well, how the fuck did the gods do that? Well, one man found that out. One man did find that out. And it wasn't like Leonardo fucking da Vinci. It was actually a guy who lived in America in the 1930s. I doubt you've heard of him. If you have, go ahead and drink a beer. I will salute you. In the annals of history, there existed a man named Edward Leedskalnin, and he built this place here in Florida called Coral Castle. Now, if we zoom out, and I am sharing this, if we zoom out, we can see that Coral Castle is in Florida, right? We have the Bahamas, we have Coral Castle close to the Everglades, close to Key West, a little bit south of Fort Lauderdale. Coral Castle seems like a cute little, fucking Disney World thing. Actually, the guy who built Coral Castle built it for a woman he loved. And I do believe that love was unrequited. So there you go. Lonely guys building the world and achieving miraculous things. Just going to back up so that we go to the image pages here. Edward Leedskalnin, there he is. A Latvian engineer. Okay. Now, the thing was, Edward Leedskalnin, if we read his little bio, born January 12, 1887. That would make him a Capricorn. He was born in Stamarina Parish, Latvia. Lived from 1887 to 1951. He was 5 feet tall. That's why his lady didn't love him, because he wasn't 6 feet tall, right? His bio says Edward Leedskalnin was a Latvian immigrant to the United States and a self-taught engineer who single-handedly built the Coral Castle in Florida, added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1984. Leedskalnin was also known for developing theories of magnetism. Now you're like, okay, big deal. This guy built a stone castle for this girl, for his girlfriend, whatever. What's so special about this guy? The thing that's so special about this guy is that the castle he built contains components of stone that weigh hundreds of tons, thousands of tons. No crane in the world can pick up a few of these individual pieces. Now, there are some pieces that could be picked up by cranes, but some of these blocks that you're seeing here cannot be picked up by any modern crane. And he not only picked them up somehow, arranged them somehow, some of them are balanced so perfectly that this rock that weighs hundreds of tons it creates a door, like a swinging door, that you can move with your finger, with one finger. A child can move it with one finger. Hundreds of tons. How did he do that? Well, Edward Leedskalnin, and here's a picture of him when he's an older man. Edward Leedskalnin would say that he knew the secrets of the ancients. He would say, I know how the pyramids of Giza were built. And I believe him because he built Coral Castle. And up until the day he died, he never really said how he did it. He was just kind of like, yeah, I know how the Egyptians built the pyramids. It was actually a secondhand account from somebody who stayed up and spied on him that started to shed light on this thing. People would wait around to watch him work, but he would only work like super late at night under I wouldn't say suspicious conditions, but he basically made it so fucking boring that nobody really caught him doing it. Except the only story that I know of was that there were two kids, and they because kids love to come and play at Coral Castle. He was adding on to it over the course of like 20 or 30 years, like I was saying, for a woman. Ladies, we would build temples for you. We would write you songs. We would go to war for you. and we would discover the secrets of space and time for you. He waited until late at night, and these kids started spying on him. Okay, now they're young kids. They're between the ages of 10 and 15, right? And there's an element of it, like adults just want to kind of like shrug it off and be like, yeah, okay, whatever, kid. But again, we have this like mystery. How the fuck did he do it? The only other thing that's comparable would be something like Stonehenge or the pyramids. Well, these kids say that Edward Leedskalnin waited until the cover of darkness, and then he took out a machine, and he had two handles which resembled ice cream cones. And he would use each one, point them at a stone, and the stone would lift off the ground, and he could move it. And he could turn it, he can orient however he wanted and place it wherever he wanted. He could stack it, or he could turn it on its side. He could balance stones against one another. And that is how he completed Coral Castle. And of course, the adults would be like, well, what the fuck? You dumbass kids, how can you move rocks with ice cream cones? And it's one of those things. It's not just Edward Leedskalnin that is reported to do things like this. So we're just going to go through a couple of these pictures here so you can see what we're talking about. Here's a picture of him standing next to Coral Castle, making of a modern myth. Just for scale. He's this little guy, and he's making things that are amazing. Edward Leedskalnin was not the only one in history that was reported to possess this power. And I'm not going to say modern times because that's a misnomer, but there's other stories where people are using a principle that has come to be known as acoustic levitation. Acoustic levitation. Now, the principles of acoustic levitation are pretty straightforward. At least it's theoretically explainable if you just follow a certain leap of logic, okay? we've already established that everything in the universe vibrates at a specific frequency. All of physicality will vibrate within 8 centimeters, but each specific type of substance comprised of different sorts of material has its own vibrational signature. There's a reason why in the Stone Age they tended to use granite. It's because if you applied certain wavelengths to granite, it would levitate. They had the technology. Edward Leedskalnin had that technology in the 30s. The ancients had it when they built Stonehenge. The gods had it when they built the pyramids. And I wouldn't even call them gods, but that's the only way I can think to explain it to you guys. Acoustic levitation. You apply a sound wave on a vibrational pattern. The sound wave and the pattern interact, and the interference pattern created causes a levitational effect. The rock literally wants to float off, and you can turn it in midair, set it hundreds of miles away if you want to, or just set it down gingerly. Is there any other records in modern times, past the invention of writing, where things like this were demonstrated? Well, there are two more that I will present to you. Okay. The first one comes from an account here where a visitor to Tibet encountered something along these lines. So I'm going to go ahead and share a screen. Where you see monks that are walking around with these crazy looking trumpets and horns, right? Which is interesting because even without meaning to think about it, we can picture monks sitting around in robes in big temples in Tibet just going, humming, making sound. Or just doing weird things. They make a sound that's so deep and so rumbling, it sounds like it would probably give a crocodile a boner, right? But a visitor to the Tibetan temples would talk about this thing here. So I'm showing this is the cover of a video where it shows monks on a mountainside. They have these giant horns that are sitting on a lever, essentially. So there's a pivot at a specific point. The monks would play these horns in such a way that it would excite boulders to move. Boulders to move. And if you look, there's two of them. There are two monks, two horns to make boulders move. Edward Leedskalnin accomplished this with electronics. These monks knew which note to play. Okay. A couple of these images will explain it a little bit further. So let's see. This one looked good. This one's not even talking about the Tibetan monks. This other image is actually talking about acoustic levitation in laboratory conditions. Now, the monks were able to use their horns to move stones. In laboratory conditions, they're only moving like a dime or like a nickel or something. But they set up an array. They have a focal point, a measured distance to the object that they are targeting. Sound waves are projected. It strikes the target. The interference pattern is created and the target lifts. Now, the science of the Tibetan monks is very, very similar. The monks need to set up a specific distance away from the objects that they're trying to build. In this case, I believe the monks were building temples up in the mountains. So they set up, it had to be a certain amount away from the stone that they wished to lift. They used their trumpets, and then the stone would jump up, and they knew what note to play to blow it however far they needed it to go. And then it would, over time, it would build a castle. Right? So it's not so hard to conceive. If we have evidences of megalithic things that were built in the past, we have Edward Leedskalnin that did it in the 30s. We had Tibetan monks that did it hundreds of years ago. Are there any other instances where acoustic levitation was harnessed as a usable tool, a useful tool? There is one more biblical source, and you guys would know it as the story of the walls of Jericho. Okay. The story of the walls of Jericho is in the book of Joshua. My favorite way to read the Bible is on the Skeptics Annotated Bible.com. It's a very amusing website because it will tell you, it'll show you the text of the Bible in whatever version you want to hear. I like it in the King James version because English is a very interesting language. But essentially, the story of the walls of Jericho is that Jericho was a city that sinned in the eyes of God. So God destroyed the city. The first few verses will explain it. This is Joshua chapter 6. It says, "Now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said unto Joshua, See, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. And ye shall encompass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the wall of the city shall fall down flat. And the people shall ascend up, every man straight before him." Now, in the context of the Bible, everybody's just like, oh, the Bible's just this old fucking book and, whatever. Josh, go blow your horn, right? Again, it seems to be an abstract story. How can you destroy a wall with trumpets? Now, hold in your mind that vision of the Tibetan monks using trumpets to displace rock to make it fly away. And in that instance, they're using the technology to construct something. You can use the same technology to deconstruct something, especially amongst a civilization that likely built their wall with hand or with pulleys and levers. Pulleys and levers as a construction implement, no contest next to acoustic levitation. So in this instance, the humans were given instructions on how to use acoustic levitation to destroy a city wall. And that's what happened at Jericho. It's interesting. Like I said, there are some laboratory studies where they're doing this thing on a small scale where they're like, yeah, we can move a little, like a penny's worth of copper using tiny little speakers and blah, 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 blah. There are other things that you can argue are similar to that, like 5G vibrates out a specific way. There are interesting things like in music where they're talking about up until the 1930s, the note A would resonate at 432 hertz, and then they changed it to 440 hertz. Now it's interesting because at least in modern music, whenever you have musicians who tune down half a step, A doesn't quite equal 432 hertz, but it's closer to that. And for some reason, that rings truer to a lot of listeners, and they don't know why. But it really has to do with 432 hertz being a sympathetic resonance to the Earth's own resonance, the Schumann resonance, which, if you remember last week, we were talking about the Schumann resonance being chief in the production of wireless energy. Nikola Tesla did it, and the Great Pyramids did it. The Schumann resonance is endemic to every single life form that is native to Earth. And it's very interesting that the frequency of the Schumann resonance is the chief frequency of 5G, like this great thing that's bringing you this wonderful podcast, which I know that you will thumbs up and share out with your friends. Now we've talked about the word creating, and there is something a little bit more close to heart, a little bit more metaphorical that I would like to present to you guys about the word. And it's this idea that a man is only as good as his word. We've talked about Ptah and about God creating reality with his word. And if you were to believe these ancient words, man was created in the image and the likeness. And that implies that we have similar creative powers. And this is true. Everything that you see was once a thought, and that thought had to be communicated, and it had to be assembled out of raw material. It had to be spoken into existence. Now it's interesting. There is that tangent that language and consequently spoken word and all that stuff was an implement of control, a tool of the gods, if you will, to confound the minds of men. Which may or may not, it's definitely true. I will say that is true. But like it or not, we find ourselves in this predicament where sound and word is a function of our experience. It is something that we have to contend with, and thus is an avenue of creation. We speak and it is. We play music to communicate. Animals make sounds to change the nature of their environments, in some instances to communicate, in some instances to declare territory. We use sound to communicate our intent, to demonstrate our character, to demonstrate our intent, to define what we are willing to accept and what we are not willing to accept, to describe the walk that we take through life, to entice a lover, to comfort a friend, to guide a child, to declare our last will and testament, or to record for all time our beliefs, maybe even to concede the fact that there is something that I haven't heard yet that might change everything. But for this, we must talk. So I appreciate you guys coming out. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'd like to invite you to one last time. Lift high whatever it is you are imbibing, and join me in the savage salute. Here is to us what is like us, not a goddamn thing.